Okay, so in the last video we were talking about product differentiation and how that's so important in trade. The bulk of world trade is trade in manufactured goods. Product differentiation is extremely important, especially for well-off consumers who like to feel that they have a choice in cars and all sorts of other goods. And then manufactured goods are actually produced for the most part under conditions of economies of scale. And what that means is that the lower unit cost can be achieved if you can produce higher numbers of units. So for example, here, if you produce Q1 million units versus Q2 million units, then you'll have to produce at higher unit cost. So it's better to be a bigger producer in conditions of economies of scale. There are two types of economies of scale. The one that we're going to talk about in this video is internal economies of scale. Which means that there are advantages to being a large firm. And those would be things like being able to have your own lawyer, maybe being able to bulk buy the raw materials that you use. Perhaps if you were a chemical firm, you could produce massive quantities of chemicals and get the advantages of the heat and all that. So internal economies of scale, there are large firm advantages. And then if we have product differentiation, which means that people like a lot of choices, that can make reaping these economies of scale a little more difficult. So if you were the Japanese producing Japanese cars only for Japanese consumers and people liked a lot of choice, you might have to produce small runs of lots of different cars, possibly at high cost. But if you enter foreign markets, so you have access to consumers in other countries, then you can produce at higher volume, so you could produce at lower unit cost and reap the benefits. So theoretically, at least, economies of scale coupled with product differentiation means that trade is beneficial because it means that you get larger volume production. And then the next thing you're probably wondering as a consumer is, oh, well, what's in it for me? And that tends to be determined a little bit by the degree of the scale economies. I mean, if the scale economies are really massive, economists talk about minimum efficient scale, which is the most efficient way to produce. If it's possible, I suppose, in some industries that minimum efficient scale is so large, it might imply that the only way to produce is using one firm, sometimes called a natural monopoly. That would be like your water company. Or sometimes scale economies are such relative to the size of the market that you have a few firms. So that you have the Coke and Pepsi type of idea, or Boeing and Airbus as on your homework. So the few firms idea leads to oligopoly. And the one we're going to look at today is many firms, probably not as many as perfect competition, producing a differentiated product, and that leads to monopolistic competition. So if we think about monopolistic competition, which is described quite nicely in the Khan Academy videos that are optional for you on the Week 3 website. Probably many of you did not study monopolistic competition in Principles of Micro, because everyone seems to run out of time before they get there. But if you did, good for you. But if not, take a look at that video. But the assumptions of monopolistic competition that turn out to be relevant are a differentiated product, just like we've been talking about, which means that this is perfect for our model. So you don't have a monopoly over pizza or cars, but you do have a monopoly over your own brand. And then many firms, enough firms that they compete with each other. They can't collude because there's too many of them, which will lead to competition. And then this is the other crucial thing, freedom of entry and exit, which means that if the industry looks very attractive, other firms will enter, and of course firms can always exit. And so what that means, the implications of that are that trade makes these monopolistically competitive firms bigger, so they become more efficient because they produce at lower unit cost. So it leads to falling average cost of production, which is a good thing. And then the competition among the firms ensures that prices fall, because prices don't always fall when costs go down. If a firm has a monopoly, they don't have, the prices aren't necessarily going to be passed on. Prices fall to consumers. And so unlike the comparative advantage case where only the import country consumers benefited, prices are going to go down for all consumers. And so that makes trade doubly beneficial for consumers. So it says it's a thing that probably has happened to you is if you buy a product that foreigners also like to buy, then your product is being produced at lower unit cost, and you get to enjoy those benefits to the extent that there's enough competition that we could describe the market as monopolistically competitive. So this actually makes trade better. So not only do consumers have more variety of products, which they really like, the monopolistic competition makes sure that the gains in terms of efficiency of production are passed on to the consumer in all countries. So trade is very, very helpful in the monopolistically competitive case.